Rachel.
Hey, Brittany.
So today I want to dive into a logical fallacy. And if you don't already have the book, there is a Tuttle Twins Guide to Logical Fallacies, which is fantastic. And I've learned a lot from it. So I want to go through one of those today that I think is very relevant, very important right now. And that is the logical fallacy of appealing to emotions. And this is going to be kind of a two-parter because I'm going to be critical of this, but then I'm going to talk about how emotion is an important tool and it does play a role. But the most important thing when you're presenting an argument, especially a philosophical, political, ideological argument, is to be logical, is to use facts. And once you have those, you can talk about how to market them or how to best convey them. But there's a very important appeal to emotion that we're seeing right now, we see always. So emotions are important, but your whole argument can't be based on that. And so right now, during this new administration, we're seeing a lot of cuts of federal grants, and not cuts, actually, I shouldn't say that because as of right now, it's a pause. And it's a pause because they're going through to see government waste, and they've already found so much. We're like, it's not there. It wasn't during this pause, but it was years ago. They found that the government had been funding a study to see what cups don't spill coffee. And it's like, wait, what? There's all these silly things we're wasting money on, and it's not government money because the government gets their money from us. So there's a lot of programs in one way or another. And, you know, Rachel and I have said this a few times that in an ideal world, the world that maybe some of us want to live on, the government is so limited where the welfare state, as we call it, the nanny state, it doesn't exist like it exists today. But I like to talk in terms of operating where we are. And so right now we have a lot of programs, and there are some of them that I think are worth more or more beneficial than others. So the pause right now is not on things like Medicaid and Medicare, things that help people. And there's a lot of misinformation going around about that. But it's pauses on all the other things where it's like, why are we doing this? Including pauses on student loans, which I think are great because I don't think we can fix the student loan problem until we get rid of student loans entirely. And I speak as somebody who has a lot of unfortunate personal experience with that. But I digress. So an appeal to emotion. So we're seeing all these programs paused, these grants paused, and you are seeing people freaking out about like, what about the people that can't get this? What about the students that can't go to school because they don't have their loans, because they don't have this? What about the federal employees who are being let go? What about this? And it's this emotional argument where if you don't agree with me, then you are a callous and cold-hearted person and a bad person. And this is that appeal to emotion. I call it the, won't somebody please think of the children fallacy, because you hear that. That's like kind of become like a silly joke. In fact, in the old show, or I guess it's still on The Simpsons, there was always a character that went, won't somebody think of the children? And that's this emotional thing where instead of sitting and breaking down, okay, what are the logical reasons for this? We go right to emotion. And that is really polarizing. It creates a lot of division because what you're saying there is if you don't agree with me, you're a bad person. If you don't agree with me, you have, poor moral character. If you don't agree with me, you don't have empathy for other people. And that's really dangerous. And it's, a fallacy is something that it's doesn't make sense. It's not logical. It's illogical. And so this is a tactic you're going to see a lot by both parties. I don't want to pretend that one is worse than the other with, you see a lot more. I don't like being too partisan, but you see a lot more of this, without the government, who will, pay for the roads and people will die without roads. You see that from more of like the Democrats. Now from the Republicans, or at least it used to be, it's funny, this flip-flopped a lot over the years. It used to be back in the early 2000s, if you don't support total war, the terrorists are going to come and they're going to kill us and we're all going to die and all that. It's funny because over the years, you actually see anti-war sentiment switch from right to left. And
it's so frustrating. Just as a side note, it seems to be whichever party is not in power, that's the peaceful party.
Isn't that funny?
So it switches. Whenever
but
they get into power, then they're pro-war. It's so frustrating.
It's frustrating. But again, back to appealing to emotion. That's what people use to get you on their side. That's what people get to get you to support what they support during campaign season when you see terrible ads. And it's funny, I assumed that when I didn't have like cable anymore, I wouldn't see them, but they're on YouTube where it's like,
yeah, they're everywhere.
This candidate wants to take away this bill, which is going to leave hundreds of children without food and blah, 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 blah. And
this candidate wants to kill puppies and kittens.
Yeah,
Don't
wants
you
to
love
kill puppies and kittens. How dare you? But that's not the actual core of the argument. And that's usually not, it's the bills or the policies they're talking about are not usually aimed at killing kittens and puppies, right?
Yeah.
There's more. Or, COVID was a great example. It was like, if you don't get the vaccine, you are killing your neighbors. That was crazy, or remember when President Biden said, this is going to be a winter of death and sickness if you don't get this vaccine, if you don't stay home. And there's all these appeals to emotion to make you feel like a bad person. But that's not logical because that's not where these arguments start from. So we need to go to where they start from. So let's talk about maybe this pause or trimming certain welfare programs. So it's going to look like, oh my gosh, you're callous. But what they're doing is they're taking a look at why these are bad. And I believe one of the arguments for food stamps where you get government assistance on food, they're now saying if you are like a single meaning you're not married, you don't have kids, able-bodied person who are getting food stamps, like you need to be looking for a job, you need to be trying to work. And people are mad about this, like, why do you want me to starve? And it's like, no. We are even keeping it in place where we want to make sure kids are being fed, but there's situations where we need to take a closer look at why it is you're using this program that is costing taxpayers, countless dollars. I don't even want to, pretend I know it's at least millions. But then let's look at war. It's, the terrorists, if we don't fight them, they're going to come and they're going to kill us. Okay, but we've been over there killing their people and occupying their land. Back in 2012, there was a great video. I don't know if it was by the Ron Paul campaign or at least like a Ron Paul fan made it, where it was like, imagine if all these countries were occupying our country. How would you feel? You'd be angry. Wait, did you really?
I wrote that.
I'm so glad you told me that because that was actually one of the most impactful videos for me on changing my foreign policy stance.
I did not make the video.
But you wrote
I wrote the article and then fans grabbed it and they did a lot of, but
I love that. I didn't know that. That's amazing. Yeah, that was very, very important for me and my and shaping my views on foreign policy. So thank you for that. So let's talk about where emotion might be good. So we need to start from a point of logic. So with foreign policy, we can say, okay, first of all, the principle of blowback. Why do terrorists want to harm us? A lot of it is because for most of their history, whether it was us, I'm talking about Afghanistan specifically, whether it was us or the Russians, they've always been occupied by another country, telling them what they can do and what they should do, and violence. And, when we're not occupying, then it moved to drone killing and all these horrible things. And it's like, Rachel, if I slap you in the face, you're probably not going to be happy about it. And you're probably going to want to retaliate. And under the non-aggression principle, which says, you don't aggress against someone unless they aggress upon you first. Well, that's what we've been doing. And so let's start with that argument. There's self-defense. There's logical. There's a logical basis. Now let's switch over to something different. And that is marketing and the general feeling of empathy. When we talk about welfare and we talk about Bennett's, the welfare state, I don't want to say welfare in general, the welfare state. Yes, we should have empathy. There are children who unfortunately have parents who, for some reason or another, have not been able to find work. And maybe that's because they fell on hard times. It happens to everybody, right? But okay, actually, let me go back there. So empathy is good. We should be able to have empathy for other people. I should be able to say, oh my goodness, I'm sorry you're doing that. That is basic human decency to say, like, I am sorry you have to go through that. That's miserable. But then using your logic, let's use the welfare state again. Is there a better way? Because the fact of the matter, if we want to talk about logic, is the government is not the best person to provide welfare. They don't even do it well, and it's costing us millions of dollars. And because they're doing it, go on.
Yeah, and some people abuse the system, you know.
And some people do.
Not everybody, but it is subject to abuse and fraud and manipulation.
But I do want to go on. I do want to stick to the empathy thing, but continue. Yeah, you're good.
Well, okay, so back in our country's history, I think it was one of the founding colonies, like Roanoke, not Roanoke, but one of the very first colonies. The settlers wanted to have a system where the community would work together and, you know, to each according to his need and from each according to his ability. You know, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? But they wanted to operate that way. But then they found that some of the people were a little lazier and they didn't work as hard as maybe they should. And maybe they ate more than they should. And it started to build resentment. And they finally had to crack down and make a rule: no work, no food. If you weren't working, you couldn't eat, because they were running out of food. They were all going to die if they kept this system. And that's just on a small scale. But on a larger scale, we might come to a point where we have to kind of dial back the emotion and the sympathy and the empathy and kind of work with, you know, limited resources with unlimited wants and needs. So, you know, and that's where you take out emotion. The emotional argument, and you got to just do the math.
Yes.
You know, is this sustainable? Is this going to work long term? Like, can we really afford the welfare state going at this rate, or is it going to sink the whole ship? You know.
Yes.
So that's take the emotion out of it and work with reality.
But now going back to empathy, because I want to hit on individual empathy. So yes, the government, and I love that you brought up that point, but let's talk about, again, like me personally having empathy for somebody I see struggling. That maybe might be an impetus, a catalyst for me to then say, I want to start a private charity. And I want to be able to, because I feel so strongly about, you know, the homeless population, and maybe, you know, some of them are veterans and some of them have mental health issues, and that's how they ended up there. And I want to help raise money for them. And I want to, you know, maybe get a local church involved, maybe do these things and then help them. Empathy is very important to sparking individual charity. So empathy and emotion is great when you're using that as maybe like a tool. But when we're talking about government, like you said, there's a logical thing there we have to acknowledge before we can go right to won't somebody think of the children. But there's also another thing I want to talk about, and that is, you know, in marketing, which I also work in, emotion is a powerful tool for getting your message across. So where you want to have logical arguments, it's also very important to know what works to spread our ideas. We have to change minds, but we have to change hearts. But we need to start from a premise that is logical so that we can make clear and concise arguments. And once we have those and we know what we believe and we can communicate those, when we're spreading those ideas, it is very important to maybe lead with a personal story. You know, everything I do in my work as a writer is I am a storyteller, and I tell people stories who've been impacted by government in a bad way. And so while the principle and the logic is still there, how do I get people to read those stories? I tell the emotional part, so you've got to interweave them. So that is like where it's good. And personal empathy for personal charity is good. But Rachel brings up a good point. You can't lead with emotion when you're crafting public policy, especially, or when you are trying to make a point that we all need to give up. We all need to, you know, share our resources because that's what good people do, because it doesn't work. So you have to have your arguments based in logic, but there is a place for emotion and there is a place for empathy.
Sure.
And so I want to wrap it up there, but I wanted to get that point across that doesn't mean emotion is bad. That doesn't mean empathy is bad, but logic. You cannot make your point known if you're only talking about emotion. So that was a lot. We will leave it there. I do highly recommend picking up the Guide to Logical Fallacies. It's great. I have learned so much from it, even as an adult. So yeah, we'll leave it there. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the podcast. And as always, thank you for listening. Talk to you next time.
Talk to you later.